When we're flying on the en route phase of our flight in VFR conditions, a nice clear day, we're a lot less reliant on our two-way radio for the safety of flight. Remember, Class E airspace is overwhelmingly the prevalent type of airspace in the US, and there's no requirement to be in radio communication with anyone here or in Class G airspace. However, it's very often a good idea to be talking with ATC on flight following, just like we are on this flight towards Easton, Maryland. We're talking to Potomac Approach. It's been quiet the last few minutes, and we've just made a call to them that has gone unanswered. There might be a problem with our radios. First of all, relax. Remember to aviate, navigate, communicate, and that the plane is flying just fine, straight and level like this without being in contact with anyone. As soon as you start to suspect that there may be a problem with your radios, we could start to troubleshoot. We'll start with the small, basic items and work our way up to other things we can try. Aircraft and avionics setups are different, but here's what we can do on our Cessna 152. First, let's check the volume of our radio. The knob here controls both the on-off switch as well as the volume. Looking at the audio panel, let's make sure we have the proper radio, COM 1, selected so we're not listening to the COM 2 frequency by accident. Let's check our microphones. The intercom is the audio system that allows us to hear our own voices and those of others in the aircraft with us. If we can't hear our own voice, it's possible the intercom might be off, in which case we might be able to transmit out and be heard by ATC without actually being able to hear ourselves. Our panel here doesn't have a separate on-off for the intercom, but many systems do. Check on that. Next, check to see if your mic is working at all. It could be a loose connection of one or both of the plugs from your headset. Wiggle them around and check the connection of the cords. Of course, in the sim, they're unplugged, but see if switching from the pilot's to the co-pilot side yields a different result. Remember that if you switch sides, you'll need to use the push-to-talk button on the other side too. Make sure you don't have a stuck mic. You'll know you're transmitting if the letter T shows up next to the active frequency you're on. If it's stuck on, you won't be able to receive any communications. Maybe there's a problem with the frequency we're speaking to Potomac on. Often on flight following, if we're too low and far away from the receiving antenna, the controller can't hear us. You could go back to the previous frequency and say something like Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango, we have negative contact with Potomac Approach on 124.55. If they can hear you, they might assign you a different frequency or tell you to try again in a few miles. Maybe someone else on frequency has a stuck mic. If that's the case, try using the guard frequency, 121.5, to contact air traffic control. All ATC facilities will be monitoring guard, so you'll be able to talk to the same controller as before. You could say something like Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango, radio check on guard. We could try to contact a flight service station, the frequency 122.2 will work. Finally, if we're sure our radios aren't able to transmit, receive, or do either, we can conclude that we're in a lost communication scenario. Believe it or not, we do have another way to communicate with ATC besides our radio. Our transponder responds to radar with a code and an altitude. In the event that our transmitter is broken but we are actually able to receive, let's say for example if our microphone doesn't work, ATC can give us instructions and we can acknowledge the instructions on the transponder. ATC might tell us to ident if we hear a transmission, in which case we'll hit the ident button and ATC will see this. They may issue us an instruction and tell us to acknowledge the instruction by turning off our transponder momentarily. Once they see this on radar, they'll tell us to turn it back on by saying to squawk normal or put it back on altitude mode. We should set code 7600 to indicate to any radar facility that we have a comms failure. Without communications, it's best to land at a non-towered airport. Remember, Class E and G airports don't require radios at all, so if we can safely judge the winds and traffic, we can land and maybe better troubleshoot the problem on the ground. But if we absolutely must continue on to a towered airport, like our destination Easton, there are procedures for getting into Class D airspace without making two-way radio contact. First of all, we could try to call up on our phones. The FAA and FCC might frown on using a cell phone in flight, but in an emergency, nothing's off the table. The chart supplement page for the airport will list some phone numbers. It might not have a number for the tower, but we can either call Potomac Clearance Delivery here or the airport manager, either of whom might be able to relay a message to the tower. We can also call flight service at 1-800-WX-BRIEF to have an FSS relay a message. Without that, we'll need to go to our light signals. AIM 4-2-13 has procedures spelled out for entering Class D airspace if a transmitter, receiver, or both are inoperative. We'll overfly the field above the top of the Delta airspace. We're squawking 7600, so the tower, or at least the approach facility that controls this area, will know we have a communications problem. They'll be ready to issue us instructions using the light gun. We know that a series of green, red, and white lights indicate different instructions. If we see a steady green light, it means we're cleared to land. And this means any runway, so have a look at winds and any traffic flow and make a pattern entry to land. Once we're down on the ground, we'll take another look at the tower for taxi instructions. Blinking green lights means we're cleared to taxi. Let's get to our parking and analyze our problem. Again, a communications failure in VFR flight isn't the emergency it might be in the clouds in IFR, but it still requires quick action and a comprehensive troubleshooting.